It is that time of the week again when we review all of the ways in which the media covers themselves in glory with our great friend, Katie Halper. She is host of The Katie Halper Show and co-host of the Useful Idiots podcast, now to be found on Substack. Great to see you, Katie.
Thanks, you too.
So we had some interesting analysis from our friends over at Fox about Joe Biden's presidency. Let's take a listen.
Some of the things he promised on the campaign trail that are going to be missing from his speech tonight. Missing lower prescription drug prices. Not going to be talking about that. Not going to be talking about expanding Medicare eligibility. And this is really important. And I know a lot of you watching have been curious about the estate tax. He will not be including that campaign plan to raise the estate tax from 40 to 45% or lower the exemption from 11 million to 3.5 million, because there are a lot of people, particularly family farm owners, who are very concerned about that particular provision. Yeah. If it went in, they would be sunk.
Yeah, he'll get around to it. Trust me. America, you elected Bernie Sanders. You just didn't know it.
Katie, congratulations. We elected Bernie Sanders. We just didn't know it.
Bam. Yeah. First of all, as usual, the Joe Biden that Fox fantasizes about is a Joe Biden I would love to be president. By the way, I should have said this before, but it's really priceless. If you look at Brian Kilmeade's face, he's so triggered. It looks like he's throwing up in his mouth the whole time the other guy is talking. But, I mean, they got this wrong, first of all. The irony is, of course, I mean, okay, it's Fox News. That's not exactly breaking news, but they got it wrong in terms of what he spoke about. Although he did not talk about the estate tax. That's the one thing they got right. But he talked about, ironically, lowering drug prices, but he has not actually come out with a plan that does that. So in a way, they were like telling the truth without realizing it or without trying it.
Yes, yeah. That is one of the weird things is, and we actually talked to Sirota a little bit about this because he caught this too. So he talked about we're going to negotiate with drug companies to lower drug prices, makes sense, and every president promises and then never bothers to do, but then doesn't actually include that in any of these plans. But I also, I noticed, obviously Republicans have been trying this, Biden's really a socialist thing for months and months now. Didn't work in the campaign, hasn't worked yet. Voters see him as a moderate. They see him as much more moderate than Obama. Obviously, you and I are not feeling like he's doing anything Bernie Sanders-like in there, or the new FDR or whatever. But I see the media more and more buying into this framing. Politico's up with Biden embraces his inner Robin Hood. They had another piece about how it was maybe
the Robin Hood with tights character. I mean, it's not homophobic or problematic. It's just a slapstick character. Yeah.
Yes, slapstick character. And then he said they have another one about how this was the most ideologically ambitious speech of the past generations or something like that, kind of playing into the Republican framework here that anything he's proposing is really radical. I mean, think about what he talked about last night. He talked about getting people vaccines. He talked about infrastructure. He talked about paid leave and childcare and fighting cancer. I mean, where is the radical redistributive agenda in any of this?
Well, he did come down, as you said, anti-cancer, which is a take that no one else has the courage to do. But yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. It's buying into the Republican framing, except that sadly enough, it's actually a Democratic framing too, right? And this is the problem. We have the Overton window shifting back. Bernie moves it to the left. Now Biden is moving it back to the right. And because he's the president, people get to pretend, right, that this is radical redistribution of wealth. They get to pretend that this is FDR-esque. I mean, the only thing FDR-esque about it is that Biden hasn't gotten rid of, the kids in cages. So in that way, it's kind of a throwback to internment camps, I guess. You can give him some credit for that in terms of FDR's legacy. He also, by the way, you talked about the vaccines. Oh, I like when he said we were basically discovering vaccines on Mars. I don't know if you heard that. He forgot to like take a pause for a beat or something. So he really was saying we're on Mars discovering vaccines. But I also Sarah Lazar tweeted this out, so shout out to her. But she noticed that, and I didn't even catch this because it was so fast and it was such a boring speech. I probably zoned out, but he doubled down on intellectual property rules. He said, America will stand up to unfair trade practices that undercut American workers in industries like subsidies for state-owned enterprises and the theft of American technologies and intellectual property, which is his basically saying that, this is his refusing to get behind the free sharing of IP for vaccines.
Which, by the way, if I could just pause you there, in his bold anti-cancer stance, if one of the arguments that pharmaceutical lobbyists have been making to try to keep the Biden administration, and successfully so far, from lifting patent protections is that then China or Russia might use this mRNA technology and cure cancer. We can't have that. It's like, wait, we don't want them to cure cancer? Wait a second. Hold the phone. You're right. What are we talking about here?
That's a perfect example of how xenophobia and, jingoism are actually more important than providing, Americans, the world. And of course, if they discover a cure to cancer, we're going to have access to that too. But that's a great metaphor for how much more important these kind of nationalist America First projects are than the healthcare of people, including the people in the United States. Again, and we see this with the vaccine too, right? Like, I think Biden gets that COVID is a communicable disease, right? A communicable virus, excuse me. Mm-hmm. So just out of self-interest, we should want everyone in the world to be vaccinated. And the fact that he's letting, greed get in the way and absurd and obscene profits get in the way, I mean, it's basically Trumpianism. It's Trump. It's just like disgusting, and it's just dressed up in a nicer framing, although barely less xenophobic and anti-China than Trump's rhetoric.
His policy with regard to patent protection for pharmaceutical companies is identical to Trump. And this isn't like a false equivalency. He is like sending over some of the finished vaccines. That's in process, lifting the embargo on some of the raw ingredients. Those are all positive steps forward. Sure. But if you want to get to the root cause of the problem, the patent protection is a lot of it on technology, by the way, that the public, U.S. taxpayer funded. So it's a public good that we funded that pharmaceutical companies then get to privatize the profits of. That's the Trump policy. That was the Obama policy. It's now the Biden policy as well.
Right.
But, to get back to the way that Fox has approached this, and I saw Ted Cruz's commentary after the speech. He was like, it was boring but radical. I might agree with the boring part. I actually don't think that that's a stupid strategy to have Biden just kind of low key and then just letting the actions speak for themselves. But do you think that people are going to start to buy into this idea that he's some kind of radical or that this agenda is somehow radical when you do see the mainstream press starting to kind of go along with this framing and accept that this is a dramatic transformation of the American economy?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, especially because he ran as the guy who beat the socialists during the general election. Mm-hmm. But now they have to appease I guess they feel like they have to appease the left. But it's great because he doesn't have to actually do that. The media can just pretend that he's doing that. So they can, he can have his cake and eat it too. He can be a moderate who's also getting credit for being more transformational and radical than he actually is.
Yes, very true.
I also do want to say one more thing, which is that, as anti-cancer as he is, and real shout out to him for that bold position, he also is the person who promised to veto Medicare for all if it came across his desk. So it would mean that, that may get in the way a little bit. That contradicts his anti-cancer stance, because, of course, you could die of cancer if you don't have access to medical care, treatment.
Hard to square that circle. Katie, thank you so much. Great to have you.
You too. I mean, thanks for having me.
More Rising for you after this.